Can I sit with
Here
you?
you go, ma'am.
A limping
Oh, thank you.
72-year-old
My
woman
pleasure.
asked a
That's very
Hells
kind.
Angels biker. Then this happened. She didn't ask for help. She didn't ask for mercy. She only asked for a chair. In a diner full of people who looked away, a 72-year-old woman limped toward the one man everyone feared. And by the time she sat down, nothing would ever be the same. The diner smelled like burned coffee and old memories. It was noon on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary moment no one remembers later. Plates clinked. A radio hummed softly behind the counter. People ate without looking up. She stood near the entrance, one hand gripping the back of a chair that wasn't hers. Her other hand trembled slightly, not from age alone, but from effort. Every step cost her something. The limp pulled her body to the left, as if the floor itself was uneven. Her voice was quiet, polite. "Excuse me, may I sit with you?" She asked the retired couple by the window first. They smiled the way people do when they're uncomfortable. The man said they were waiting for someone. They were. She asked the construction workers near the jukebox. One shrugged. Another said the seat was taken. It was. She asked a young mother in a booth. The woman avoided eye contact, pulled her children closer, and said nothing. Each rejection was small, gentle, respectable, but they stacked up inside her chest. She adjusted the strap of her worn purse and turned toward the last empty table, the one no one else wanted. The man sitting there didn't blend in. Leather vest, heavy boots, tattoos climbing up his arms like old scars, a Hell's Angels patch stitched across his back. Cal Mercer didn't look friendly, he didn't look safe. She stopped in front of him anyway. "Sir," she said, her voice thinner now, "can I sit with you?" Cal looked up slowly. His eyes were steady, not unkind, but guarded. He took in the way she leaned on the chair, the way she kept her coat buttoned tight, even though the diner was warm, the way she was already bracing herself for no. He didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. He stood, pulled the chair out, and said one word. "Sit!" Her shoulders dropped the moment she did, like she'd been holding herself together with nothing but will. Around them, the diner kept eating. Forks moved, coffee poured. No one noticed the moment that changed everything. She sat carefully, as if afraid the chair might disappear. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers knotted together. Cal returned to his seat without a word. Her name, she said after a moment, was Margaret Hale, 72 years old, widowed. She ordered toast and coffee, nothing else. When the plate arrived, she stared at it longer than necessary, like she was checking whether she was allowed to eat. When she finally did, the bites were small and precise, controlled. Cal didn't speak. He watched. He noticed how her hands shook when she lifted the cup, how she flinched when the front door slammed shut, how her eyes kept drifting toward the parking lot, counting something invisible. Time. There was a bruise on her wrist, faded but shaped like fingers. Another yellowed mark near her collarbone, just visible when her coat shifted. Not fresh, not accidental. Her shoes were worn unevenly, soles thinned down more on one side. Walking shoes, long walking shoes. Her purse sat on her lap, not the table. She kept touching it, checking the zipper that didn't close properly. Inside, something heavy clinked softly. Cal had seen fear before, in war zones, in hospital rooms, in men who pretended they weren't afraid, but this was different. This was trained fear, the kind that learns how to stay quiet. They talked about nothing at first. The weather, how long the diner had been open, how places used to feel slower when she was younger. Then she said it. "I'm not supposed to be here." Cal didn't react. He just waited. "My nephew," she added, eyes fixed on the table. "He says it's dangerous for me to go out alone." "Is it?" Cal asked gently. She looked up at him then, really looked. And for a second the fear slipped. What remained was sharp, clear. "No." That was all she said, but it was enough, because Cal Mercer knew the difference between confusion and captivity. Margaret used to have a house with yellow curtains and a maple tree out front. She used to pay her bills early, used to bake bread on Sundays and freeze half of it for later. Later had come faster than she expected. After her husband died, she managed fine. Quiet, but fine, until her sister's son, Daniel, came back into her life. Well-spoken, clean-cut, worked in finance, told everyone he was looking out for Aunt Maggie. He said the stairs were too dangerous, that she might fall, that living alone wasn't safe anymore. He said it with concern in his voice and logic in his words. And when fear is dressed up as care, it's easy to believe. She moved into his home, a converted room at the back. Small, window sealed shut, lock on the outside of the door. For safety, he said. Her pension checks started going into an account she didn't control. Her phone was lost and never replaced. Her mail rerouted. Her friends told she was resting, declining, forgetful. She was trapped. The limp came from standing too long on concrete floors, from being rushed, from being grabbed once when she tried to leave. She de-learned to move carefully, speak less, watch the clock. 2 hours, that was how long she had today. 2 hours before Daniel came back. She hadn't planned to meet a biker, she just needed a place to sit. Cal listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "When was the last time someone checked on you?" he asked. She smiled sadly. "You did." When Margaret stood to leave, her purse slipped from her lap. Something fell to the floor with a soft metallic sound. A key. Cal picked it up instinctively. She froze. "That's mine," she said quickly. He handed it back, but noticed the tag. Storage Unit 19. She hesitated, then sighed, like a dam cracking just enough. "It's the only place he doesn't know about," she said quietly. "Everything I couldn't say out loud is there. Receipts, documents, notes written late at night in shaking handwriting, proof she existed, proof she was sane, proof she wasn't disappearing on her own." She tucked the key back into her purse and stood. "I should go," she said. "Thank you for letting me sit." Cal stood too. "Margaret," he said, "you don't have to go back alone." She looked at him, tears finally breaking through. Not loud, not dramatic, just relief spilling over. And somewhere between the door and the table, a woman who had been invisible for years was finally seen. Tighter, her shoulders rising out of habit. She kept glancing toward the road. "How much time do you have?" Cal asked. She checked the sky, not her watch. "An hour, maybe less." He nodded once. No judgment, no panic. Panic makes people disappear faster. They rode separately. Cal followed her in his truck as she took the bus toward the edge of town. She didn't look back until the doors closed, like she was afraid to hope he'd still be there. When she saw him through the window, steady and unhurried, something in her face softened. The storage facility sat between an auto shop and an empty lot, rows of metal doors. Quiet, forgot. Unit 19 smelled like dust and cardboard. Margaret knelt slowly, joints stiff, and pulled a box forward. Inside were folders wrapped in grocery bags, notes dated years apart, bank statements she didn't recognize, copies of her ID, letters she'd written but never sent. "I didn't know who to trust," she said, "so I trusted paper." Cal read without speaking. He saw patterns, timelines, control disguised as care, her pension redirected, her medical records altered, doctor visits listed she'd never attended, medications prescribed she'd never taken. Someone was preparing her ending. "You did the right thing," Cal said quietly. She shook her head. "I waited too long." "No," he replied. "You waited until someone saw you." Outside, an engine started nearby. Margaret flinched. "That's him," she whispered. Cal closed the folder gently. "Then we don't wait anymore." Cal didn't go to the police first. He went somewhere else. The clubhouse wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was quiet in the way places are when people listen more than they talk. Ronan, the chapter president, heard the story without interruption. He didn't look surprised. He looked careful. "You believe her?" Ronan asked. "Yes, then we move." Not fast, not reckless. Carefully, they verified everything. Quiet rides past the house. Late-night checks, photos of the barred window, the lock on the outside of the door. Neighbors who repeated Daniel's words like scripture. "She's declining. He's such a good nephew." Respectability was doing most of the work for him. Margaret stayed somewhere safe, somewhere warm. She slept without locking the door for the first time in years, woke up confused by the silence. For the first time, no one told her when to eat. The men didn't threaten, didn't confront. They applied pressure the way gravity does, always present, always watching. Daniel noticed. He started slipping, showing up late, snapping at clerks, making excuses that didn't line up. He went to the bank one morning and found accounts frozen. Went to church and felt eyes on him. Went to the diner and realized the chair across from him was never empty anymore. People had started asking questions, and questions, once asked, don't go back to sleep. The police came when the evidence was complete, and Margaret's voice was no longer alone. Daniel protested loudly. He cried. He explained. He blamed stress. He blamed responsibility. He blamed her age. None of it worked. The truth doesn't shout. It waits. Margaret gave her statement calmly. No anger, no drama, just facts, dates, names, proof she'd been collecting piece by piece. When they led him away, she didn't watch. She watched the sunlight through the window instead. Later, she sat on a bench outside, hands folded, breathing slowly. Cal stood nearby, not intruding. "They'll ask why I stayed," she said. "They always do," he replied. She nodded. "I thought being quiet would keep me safe. And now, I know it almost killed me." She looked older somehow. And stronger. Margaret didn't go back to her old house. She didn't want yellow curtains anymore. She wanted light. She moved into a small apartment near the park, learned the names of the birds, walked slowly, without fear of being timed. Sometimes she went back to the diner. Same booth, same coffee. The staff knew her now. Cal came by once a week. They didn't talk about the past much. They didn't need to. One afternoon, a young woman stood near the door, holding a tray, unsure where to sit. Margaret smiled and pulled out the chair across from her. "Sit," she said, and the room, without realizing it, learned something new. Days after the arrest felt strange to Margaret. Too open, too quiet. She kept waiting for someone to tell her what to do next, when to wake, when to eat, when to sit still. No one did. Freedom didn't arrive like relief. It arrived like confusion. At night, she slept lightly, startled by ordinary sounds. A passing car. A door closing somewhere else in the building. Her body hadn't learned yet that no one was coming to check if she was where she was supposed to be. Cal checked in, but never hovered. He understood space. He understood what it meant to give someone their life back without taking credit for it. One afternoon, Margaret stood in front of a mirror in her new apartment and realized something unsettling. She didn't know how she wanted her hair anymore. For years, it had been cut quickly, practically, without asking. Now the choice felt heavy. She sat on the edge of the bed and laughed softly at herself, then cried. At her first follow-up appointment with a real doctor, one who spoke to her instead of about her, she learned how close she'd come to something permanent. Malnutrition, untreated injuries, medications listed in her chart that had never been in her body. "You were disappearing," the doctor said gently. Margaret nodded. "I know." What stayed with her wasn't anger toward Daniel. It was the realization of how many people had believed him, how many had nodded and smiled and walked away. She began writing again, not evidence this time, just words, small truths, things she wanted to remember. One entry read, "Someone pulled out a chair. That's when I came back." Hal Mercer didn't talk about what he did. He didn't need to. To most people, he was still just a biker. Loud engine, leather vest, a shape they crossed the street to avoid. Margaret saw something else. She saw patience. She saw restraint. She saw a man who understood that power wasn't about intimidation, but timing. One afternoon, she asked him why he'd helped. He didn't answer right away. "My brother," he said finally, "died somewhere people said was safe. That was all." He didn't tell her about the paperwork, the unanswered calls, the guilt of not noticing sooner. Some losses teach you how to spot the quiet ones. Margaret nodded. She didn't press. Silence was something she understood deeply now. At the diner, things had shifted, not loudly, just enough. People noticed her, asked how she was, offered seats before she asked. Their kindness felt awkward. Late, she accepted it anyway, because bitterness would cost her more than forgiveness ever could. It started slowly. A neighbor stopped Margaret one morning and apologized, said she should have checked, said she'd believed the story she'd been told. A woman from church sent a letter, not excuses, just regret. Margaret read them all. She didn't respond to most. She learned something important in that time. Closure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from choosing where your energy goes next. She volunteered twice a week at a senior center, nothing official. Just sitting, listening. One woman spoke about her son controlling her finances. Another mentioned being afraid to ask questions. Margaret didn't lecture. She just shared her story when asked, and people listened because she didn't sound bitter. She sounded alive. On a quiet afternoon, Margaret returned to the storage unit one last time. She stood in front of the metal door, key heavy in her hand. Inside were the papers that had saved her life. She didn't need them anymore. She closed the box carefully and labeled it finished. As she locked the door, she felt lighter than she had in years. That evening, she sat at the diner alone, coffee cooling, sunlight stretching across the floor. A man hesitated near her table, tray in hand. She smiled first. "Go ahead," she said. "You can sit." And just like that, the chair stayed pulled out. Freedom, Margaret learned, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with music or applause. It sounded like small things: the hum of her refrigerator at night, the soft click of her own door locking from the inside, the quiet certainty that no one would count her steps or time her absence. She walked every morning now, slowly, on purpose. The limp was still there, but it no longer felt like a sentence, just a reminder. Some days she rested on a bench and watched the park wake up, joggers passing, dogs pulling at leashes. Life moving forward without permission. She liked that. Cal watched from a distance when he came by. He noticed how she carried herself differently. Shoulders back, eyes up, not rushing. One morning she surprised him. "You know," she said, sipping her coffee, "I used to think kindness was loud, big gestures, speeches." "And now?" he asked. "Now I think it's quieter than cruelty," she replied. "That's why it's harder to notice." Cal smiled, just a little. Margaret started sleeping through the night. When she dreamed, it wasn't of locked doors anymore. It was of tables, chairs, hands pulling them back. She donated most of her old clothes, bought a coat she chose herself. Blue, soft, warm. At the checkout, the cashier asked if she needed help carrying it to the car. Margaret paused. "No," she said gently, "but thank you for asking." It mattered choosing when to accept help. That evening, she wrote in her notebook again. "Freedom doesn't feel like running. It feels like standing still without fear." She closed the book and let the words rest. People tried to thank Cal. They shook his hand, called him a hero. Offered praise he didn't know what to do with. He nodded, changed the subject. He didn't correct anyone's assumptions about him either. Let them think what they wanted. He'd lived long enough to know that reputation was cheaper than character. Margaret understood that too. One afternoon, she asked him if he ever regretted the way people saw him. He considered the question carefully. "No," he said, "because the ones who need me don't see that." She smiled at that. The diner owner framed a photo near the counter. It wasn't dramatic, just Margaret sitting at a table. A chair pulled out across from her, light spilling in through the window. No names, no explanation, just the image. People paused when they saw it, some longer than others. Cal didn't linger there anymore. He didn't need to. His work was finished. Or maybe it never really ended, it just moved quietly to the next place it was needed. On his last visit, Margaret reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You saved me," she said. He shook his head. "You saved yourself, I just didn't look away." That mattered more than either of them said out loud. Time moved on. Margaret turned 73. She baked a small cake and shared it with neighbors she'd chosen herself. People who knocked, not entered. She still went to the diner. Same booth, same coffee, and always the extra chair. Sometimes no one took it. Sometimes someone did. A tired nurse, a lonely man, a teenager pretending not to need company. Margaret never asked questions right away. She knew silence could feel like safety. She learned that people don't always need fixing. Sometimes they just need a place to sit. One afternoon, a woman with shaking hands hovered nearby. "Excuse me," she said softly, "is this seat taken?" Margaret pulled the chair out without hesitation. "No," she said, "it's been waiting." The woman sat, exhaled, and something unseen loosened between them. Outside, the world kept rushing. Inside, something stayed still, and that was enough. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need it. Subscribe for more stories of